Earth's magnet has lost 10% of its strength in the last 150 years. That means, of course, it used to be stronger since it's getting weaker, and it cannot be more than 25,000 years old. Just the Earth's magnetic field decline limits it to less than 25,000 years, and that also means carbon dating can't work. Give you a few examples here. The lower leg of a mammoth dated 15,000 years old, but the skin was 21,000. One part of a mammoth is 29,000 years old. Another part's 44,000. You talk about a slow birth. This is all part of another theory called Pangea. How many have ever heard of Pangea before? That all the continents used to fit together. Well, I bet they didn't tell you they shrank Africa nearly 40% to make them fit, did they? Did they tell you they took out all of Mexico and Central America? Señor, ¿qué pasa? ¿Dónde está Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala? And they don't tell you what I think ought to be obvious to a kindergartner. Did you know, if you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice there is dirt underneath. People say, Hovind, do you think the continents were ever connected? I say, well, what do you mean they're still connected? I mean, like right now, it's just the low places are full of water, that's all. What do you mean, were they connected? Hello, they're still connected. The Sahara Desert has what's called a prevailing wind pattern. The wind almost always blows the same way. This creates a serious problem. The hot air comes off the desert, kills the trees next door, and that area becomes desert. The process is called desertification. You can read about it in an earth science book. Sahara Desert has been studied very carefully. They did a long study on this and said, you know what, folks, the Sahara Desert is probably about 4,000 years old. That's when it started growing. Egypt used to be fertile land all over the place. Okay, well then I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger desert someplace? Why would the biggest desert on the planet be less than 4,000 years old? Well, I have a theory about that. Now here's my theory. I believe about 6,000 years ago, God created everything. 4,400 years ago, there was a flood. Now it's pretty hard to have a desert under a flood. You got to admit that would be tough, okay? So the desert couldn't start growing until the flood water went down. So I predict, based on the Bible, the biggest desert in the world will be less than 4,400 years old. It is. Wow, maybe the Bible's right. When they drill into the ground, sometimes they hit oil. The oil's under incredible pressure in some places, up to 20,000 pounds per square inch. It'll come squirting up out of the ground like a big zit. 20,000 psi. Well, the guys who study the rocks on top of the oil say, it just can't handle that pressure for more than about 10,000 years. I know the weight of rock supplies pressure, but the pressure in the well is greater than the weight of overburden. They say it should have cracked the rock and leaked off in less than 10,000 years. Here's a picture of the oldest tree on the planet. It's called the bristlecone pine. We've got a piece of bristlecone in our museum in Pensacola. It's only 30 inches in diameter, and it's 700 years old. You can count the rings with a magnifying glass. It grows real slow. Now, tree ring dating is not an exact science. Trees can produce 2 rings a year or 3 rings a year. Okay? And be very careful about tree ring dating with overlapping sequencing. We cover more on that during Q&A time if you'd like. But the oldest tree in the world, this textbook says, is 4,300 years old. Earth's oldest organism. That's a pretty old tree. But I've got a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have an older tree someplace? Why would the oldest tree be 4,300 years old? I took my whole family over to Australia. My daughter and I got to go scuba diving at the Great Barrier Reef. It was incredible. Some of the reef was destroyed during World War II by ships and anchors and bombs and stuff like that. So the environmentalist wackos went out there to see how fast it grows back. They watched the reef grow for 20 years. It was a government project. After watching it grow for 20 years, they said the reef is less than 4,200 years old. Okay, well then I have a question. If the earth is millions of years old, why don't we have a bigger reef someplace? Why on earth would the biggest reef be only 4,200 years old?